Hello and welcome. So this video is about the React hook useRef. Perhaps you've been learning some React, getting familiar with it, learning how to write functional React components, and maybe you've used a couple of the common React hooks such as useState or useEffect. Well, if that's where you are, then you're in a great place to learn another React hook, useRef. It's a very useful tool, and I highly recommend you get familiar with it because you will run into a use case where it is necessary. So let's jump right into it. Okay, so what is useRef? As mentioned in the intro, useRef is a React hook. And there are some similarities to useState. Both useState and useRef serve the purpose of allowing us to store variables, store values that persist across component re-renders. I would say the key difference, although there are a few others, is that changing the value of a useRef variable does not trigger a re-render of the component, whereas changing a state variable does. So why is that useful? Why is it useful for us to be able to store something similarly to useState, but have it not trigger a re-render? Well, I'll just jump into what I believe is the most common use case for useRef, which is to store DOM elements in our useRef and then be able to manipulate them directly. Within React, it's not proper to use vanilla JavaScript such as document.getElementById and manipulate our DOM nodes that way. You would run into unexpected behavior. It's far less efficient. We want to stay within the React ecosystem utilizing the virtual DOM, and that's why we have useRef. So if we assign our useRef value to a DOM node, we can directly manipulate it, and that's great. Sometimes it's extremely useful to be able to just point directly to a DOM element, manipulate it, and not trigger a re-render, and have that reference to that DOM element persist between re-renders that might happen, when we're actually changing some state or something. Okay, so let's have a look at how we set this up. So if we look at a very, very, very simple React component, we got to import useRef just like we would with useState or useEffect. And then we instantiate a variable and we evoke useRef and pass an initial value. Now, what this does is it creates a simple JavaScript object with one property called current. So this initial value that we pass actually gets assigned to current. And this property is what we're going to work with when we're working with our useRef object. We're only going to work with this one property. Okay, so the initial value of current is assigned null because we've passed it here, but then we can simply reassign it like this, just like we would in vanilla JavaScript. We just say myref.current equals hello, and then you could reassign it to anything, a number, an array, or like I mentioned earlier, a DOM element. Okay, so let's just look at a live example where we're utilizing useRef. Here's a simple app with two forms, and I'm demonstrating, form handling using state and form handling using useRef. Now, you do want to use state really to handle, your form inputs and the values and such. I'm just sort of using a form to sort of demonstrate the differences between useState and useRef. So this one, I have three state variables, one for the value of the name, and one for the email, and one for the password, and then I have an onChange thing that updates the state every time I change a character. And in the code, at the very top of my component, I have a console log that will indicate every time the component is re-rendered. I'm just working at the top level of this React app within the app component. And here you can actually see those three state variables. So if I start typing, you can see that this is triggering a re-render every single time. And so if I type an email and a password and hit submit, the only thing that happens when we do this submit is we trigger an alert and we see our three values that we passed in. The same thing happens with this form, But as you can see on the right, it's not triggering any more re-renders. So I can do the same thing here, submit, but not a single re-render occurred. How is that happening? And also, if I reload the page, you may notice that the first field is in focus and the cursor is there. How did I do that? I can also programmatically change which input on this form is focused. Okay, let's look at how we do that. Okay, so what I've done is I've created 3 useRef variables: name ref, email ref, and password ref. It's a good convention to follow to add ref at the end of these variable names so that anyone looking at your code would know that these are not state variables, but ref variables. Okay, now let's scroll way down to our JSX. Here's the first form that utilizes state, but here's the one that utilizes useRef. And here's the key here to assigning a DOM element to a useRef variable. You pass it to the ref attribute of the element itself. When you do so, React will assign the DOM element directly to that ref's current property. And so I've done that for all 3 inputs. And then when the form is submitted, I call this handle ref submit function, which directly mutates the DOM elements. It can access their current value, and so it's doing some validation here, making sure I've filled out all 3 fields. But if I have, it triggers that alert that you saw in the app, and then it directly changes the value, the text that is displayed within the input, to empty strings. So that's showing you how we can access our DOM elements and manipulate them directly. And so that's also how I was able to do a form and submit it without using a single state variable and not triggering a single re-render. The reason I said that it might not be a good idea to handle the form state using useRef like this is that at any point, if you need some kind of reaction to occur in the UI, you won't be able to do it if you're using useRef. For example, if, say, I wanted to, I've uncommented this paragraph tag here. If I wanted to display the currently entered name right below the name input field, I would do it like this. If I were using state, I would simply just render the value of the state variable name. If I wanted to try to do so with useRef, I would say entered name, and then I would try to render the nameref.current.value. The reason we have this question mark here is that initially nameref is null, and so I can't access a .value property of it. This ensures that it'll only try to do so once we have a non-null value for the nameref. Okay, so I'm trying to render the currently entered name on both forms. Let's see what happens when I do that. I'll reload the page, start typing here, and as you can see, it's updating it to exactly what I've typed here. If I do that as well, and these are pretty interesting names, you can see it's not rendering what I'm doing. So if you ever want, any kind of UI state change to occur, you got to use state. It would only be when I actually do something that triggers a re-render that what I had typed down here would actually show up. Because like I mentioned, and like I'm really trying to drive home, is the fact that mutating the useRef value does not trigger any sort of re-render. Okay, reload the page again. And as I mentioned earlier, the focus goes straight to this first element, which is really nice. Sometimes you want a form to pop up and you want the cursor to be right there in the first field so that the user won't have to click into it. That can be very annoying sometimes, especially like in a game I'm making, a form pops up for your betting amount. You don't want to have to click in there. You want to just type the number and hit the button, get right on with it. So how did I do this? Well, it's pretty straightforward now that you understand how to assign a DOM node to a useRef variable. I've already done so here. I've already done so with this name ref. So all I have to do to get it to be in focus when the app loads is just use a use effect. It's a good idea to check and make sure that it's not still currently null before you try to do something like call focus on it. But once it actually is assigned that node element, sorry, that DOM element, then you can just call focus on it. And so the use effect will do this when the component fully mounts and put it straight into focus. And for the case here where you can do something, on a button click or whatever, change the focus on a button click, it's really no different. You would just look at the button click itself here, and I just say, nameref.current.focus, call the focus method on it. Same for when you click on the email button. The button says focus email. Click on that, call focus on that particular DOM element. Easy peasy. I have one here where if you click on it, an animation occurs. So let's look at the on click for that. Start animation. I call boxRef, which obviously is referencing that DOM element that is the blue box. And if there is a current property, if that DOM element exists, basically, add this class to it. And then after 1 second, remove it. And then in the CSS, there's some transitioning going on to create the smooth animation. It's great for getting information about a particular DOM element. You can access the width and height using client width and client height. Here's another example of me directly modifying it. And then if I click measure box again, I can get the new dimensions from that. And that's pretty much it as far as the simple use cases for useRef go. Other examples of use cases include keeping track of the previous value of a state value, or at least doing so with fewer re-renders than you would with, using like 2 state variables or whatever. And then another practical use case that I've seen is keeping track of the set timeout ID or a set, a set interval ID. You have a timer going or something, and you need to keep track of the name of that particular time interval, to stop it or clear it. useRef is a good way to do that. So that's pretty much it. The main use case, as I've said, is accessing DOM elements and being able to directly reference and manipulate them just as you would with good old-fashioned get element by ID. So now when you need to, which might not be as often as you think, you have the tools to do so. It can also come in very handy with third-party libraries, that involve maybe using a canvas or something like that, like chart.js. They will often require that you use useRef in order to target the element that library is rendering and to utilize it accordingly with useRef. So don't be intimidated by useRef. It's really quite simple. Just follow the setup and then you're good to go. So I hope that useRef is now in your tool belt, and I hope that you understand when and where to use it. And I hope you're excited about implementing it and making your React apps even more dynamic. Alrighty, folks. Take care and happy coding.